Let's get into chapter 8. Are we on with chapter 8? Let's do chapter 8. Ecclesiastes chapter 8, we're going to start with the first 4 verses. Who is like the wise man, and who knows the interpretation of a matter? A man's wisdom illumines him and causes his stern face to beam. I say, keep the command of the king because of the oath before God. Do not be in a hurry to leave him. Do not join in an evil matter, for he will do whatever he pleases. Since the word of the king is authoritative, who will say to him, what are you doing? Makes perfect sense, right? Verse 1. What rhetorical question does Solomon ask? Who is like the wise man and who knows? So Solomon had just explained to us he is not a wise man. Look back in chapter 7, verse 23. I tested all this with wisdom, and I said, I will be wise, but it was far from me. He's saying himself, that's how I went seeking, I didn't find it. So now he says at the beginning, again, we have chapters, it's not how it was there, but the next flow of thought for him is, he's not a wise man. So who can be wise is what Solomon's asking. He's basically saying, if it can't be me, who else could be wise, wiser than me? It's a rhetorical question. What's the answer? No one. No one. That's why he's putting it out there. Who also knows the interpretation of a matter? What matter has he been focused on? Trying to figure out what God is doing when he rewards evil men and does not reward righteous men, according to what man's standards are here on earth. That's what he's been spinning out on. What man of wisdom can know this, and who can interpret the matter? That's what he's putting out in a rhetorical question. What does Solomon say about man's wisdom? Okay, so what does man's wisdom do for him? It illumines him. What does illumine mean? We went back to dictionary.com. That's my favorite little, what does that word mean, right? How can I simplify that? It says to make lucid or clear or to throw light on a subject. So when a man believes he has found an answer to these types of questions, what does that do for him? It causes his face to beam. He feels like, I got it. Some light bulb went on for me. All right, so man can do that. Nothing wrong with that. That doesn't mean he always gets it. Doesn't mean his face is always illumined or that he's always got wisdom or he can always answer every matter. But when there is a light bulb moment, it's reflected in that he feels that he's got some clarity from God. And he will beam with that. Sometimes that's how I feel when I finish in here. We've done a chapter and I go, there was some light there that wasn't there before. Verse 2, what is Solomon's advice? Keep the command of the king because of the oath before God. Does it look like he's changed direction for us or gone somewhere strange? All right. In Israel, in this time, those that were elevated in a leadership form gave an oath before God to the newly recognized king. We see this in 2 places in Scripture. First, we'll go to 2 Samuel chapter 5, and I'll do verses 1 through 3. Then all the tribes of Israel came to David at Hebron and said, behold, we are your bone and your flesh. Previously, when Saul was king over us, you were the one who led Israel out and in. And the Lord said to you, you will shepherd my people Israel, and you will be a ruler over Israel. So all the elders of Israel came to the king at Hebron, and King David made a covenant with them before the Lord at Hebron. Then they anointed David king over Israel. So the leaders at that time would have been the elders over the tribes. They've decided to come together and to give allegiance to David, and they do it before the Lord. That's the oath that's being taken when it mentions covenant here. Also in 1 Chronicles chapter 29, verses 23 and 24. Then Solomon sat on the throne of the Lord as king instead of David his father, and he prospered, and all Israel obeyed him. All the officials, the mighty men, and also all the sons of King David pledged allegiance to King Solomon. Right? When you're going to come before the king, you're accepting. There's a loyalty pledge. I'm going to support you as king. And that's what these men do. And it's before God. So they're witnessed among each other. They're witness to the one they're pledging their allegiance to or taking the oath to. And it's all done under God. When God brought a king to the throne, those in leadership acknowledged the king's authority was given by God by taking the oath before God. In their way, they're acknowledging God's sovereignty in who he is selecting as king. That's what they're doing. Ecclesiastes 8:3 now. What does Solomon say the duty of those men who gave their oath before God to be? He says, don't be in a hurry to leave him. Do not join in evil matter, for he will do whatever he pleases. What would it mean for someone to leave him? Right. So to take the loyalty that was promised to one man as king and to give that loyalty to another man. That's what it means to leave him. When someone would leave the king, what does Solomon call this? Do not join in an evil matter. If you've taken the oath, don't go back on it. When you do, that's an evil matter. What right does the king have? He can do whatever he pleases. Right or wrong, right? He's still in the position, in God's sovereignty, he's still the king. And if you've given oath, that's the king. Do you think that was hard when people saw the king doing some wrong things? He still says, you don't get to take back your loyalty. You don't get to switch to a different team. That would be an evil matter. The king will do what he pleases, yet because he is placed there by God and men had given their allegiance and they are not to abandon their oath. Yes, ma'am. Exactly. So David would be, the question is in regards to an example of Saul and David. And I would say yes, David would have been an example of someone who not only did he see the potential for another king in place of Saul, he knew it was to be him. And yet he would not raise a finger to Saul. He understood this concept. So Solomon's talking about something that's occurred where this has been a violation. Because there were many that did leave. And we are actually going to go to some of those scriptures today because it is a picture of this. In verse 4, how does Solomon continue this thought? So the word of the king is authoritative, and who will say to him, what are you doing? The word of the king holds authority. God-given authority, man-acknowledged authority. Because this is God-given, what is Solomon's challenge? Who will say to him, what are you doing? Who would be able to question the king given authority by God? Now, we're not talking about whether the king's right or wrong, are we? We're just saying that once he's the king and you've pledged allegiance, you stick by the man. That's what he's saying. Yes.
But isn't that exactly what...
Exactly. I think that's exactly what he's spinning out on. So he's going to talk about it in this other realm when in fact it is the relationship we have before God. What are you doing if you've acknowledged God to be the king, to be the authority? Why are you questioning him when he does what you don't expect him to do? So we go back to Ecclesiastes, and we'll do the next we'll do 3 verses, 5 through 7. He who keeps a royal command experiences no trouble, for a wise heart knows the proper time and procedure. For there is a proper time and procedure for every delight, though a man's trouble is heavy upon him. If no one knows what will happen, who can tell him when it will happen? So in verse 5, what example of following the king's authority is given? He who keeps a royal command. Okay, so a royal command would come from who? A king. To keep the command is to do what? Well, it's to obey the command. Let's talk about what it means to keep the command. It means you obey the command. You do what the king says. When you obey the king, what is to come? You experience no trouble. Why is this true? For a wise heart knows the proper time and procedure. What is this time and procedure in regards to? What's he just talked about? The command of the king. When there's a command of the king, there's an appropriate timing and a procedure that must be followed. Do what you are to do in regards to the king, and there will not be trouble. Keep in mind, this ties back to following the king's command, not because of greatness of his commands, but because one took an oath declaring his recognition. This man is king only because God has made him king. Verse 6, what is true? For there's a proper time and procedure for every delight. The truth is, there's always a correct time and process for everything that happens. Does that take us back to chapter 3? There's a time for everything under the sun. There's nothing that falls outside of a proper time and process. This is true even when what is seen in that verse. Though a man's trouble is heavy upon him. When man is going through trouble, it is proper to keep in mind this too is in accordance with an understanding there is a proper time and procedure for this in his life. Does that make sense? In everything that he's been talking about, there's no guarantee or promise of prosperity. When you experience these things, know that it's a proper time and procedure for the trouble. We don't always know why, and that's what Solomon wants to figure out. And it's like, nope, not going to tell you why. We mentioned last week, it could be for a variety of reasons. It could be because there's discipline. It could be because there's punishment. It could be because he's taken the dross off the top. We don't know why. We just know if we see ourselves or another in that, we are to give the counsel, it's from God. That's it. Not because you did or didn't do anything. That's not where the counsel should go. And that's what we talked about earlier. That's where bad counsel goes within the church, often. Because they too have made assumptions leading up to that teaching. In verse 7, one must endure what is placed before him. Why? If no one knows what will happen, well, who can tell him when it will happen? What is meant by if no one knows what will happen? No man knows events and what will happen to another man. That's not a true statement if somebody's out there trying to tell you that they know. They don't know. They're guessing because only God knows. If we can accept that no man can know what events will happen, then logically, who would say what? Who can tell him when it's going to happen? Man is not in a position to predict outcomes. Isn't that what Solomon's been teaching? When men claim otherwise, they are not speaking truth. When men claim to know what is going to happen to another man, or even when events are going to happen to another man, they are not speaking the truth. Period. Only God knows. Only God knows every detail, every event, and the timing of every event. There is no man that can know. That's what he has in some ways been spinning out about. He wants to predict. If you'll do the good things, I tell you good things are going to happen. When you do the wicked things are going to happen. And he's like, nope. There is no way you can know what to tell another man. I mean, I've done counseling and I'll tell people, look, woman, do this. In your marriage, do this thing. What I don't turn around and end that with is, and I can promise you your husband will X, Y, Z. Because I don't know what he's going to do. I just know if she knows what God's called her to do, that's what she's to do. Period. Period. There's no promise if she does X, Y, Z, he's going to do anything. She needs to do what God has in her life for her to do. So that's my little personal experience to what he's describing here. No one can tell you if you do X, Y, Z, this is what's going to happen. And if they do, ladies, you should be very careful because they have no idea what God has planned for you. I'm not going to go any further there. There's a whole bunch of stuff out there. I'm not going to be touching it, but it goes on in the church all the time. Okay? Back to Ecclesiastes chapter 8, verses 8 through 11. No man has authority to restrain the wind with the wind, or authority over the day of death. And there is no discharge in the time of war, and evil will not deliver those who practice it. All this I have seen and applied my mind to every deed that has been done under the sun, wherein a man has exercised authority over another man to his hurt. So then, I have seen the wicked buried, those who used to go in and out from the holy place, and they are soon forgotten in the city where they did thus. This too is futility. Because the sentence against an evil deed is not executed quickly, therefore the hearts of the sons of men among them are given fully to do evil. Well, that just makes sense. Okay, verse 8. What examples does Solomon give to demonstrate man can't change events of life? Man has no authority to restrain wind with wind or the authority of the day of death. So, how does one restrain wind? Can you stop the wind from blowing? No. So obviously he's using something that's obvious to anybody, anywhere on the earth. They could relate to this and go, yeah, you're right, I can't stop the wind. Man can create shelter from the wind, but he can't stop the wind blowing. And what foolishness would there be for a man to try to stop the wind by creating a contrary wind? That conclusion is impossible. That's his point. He's using a picture that everybody can relate to. I couldn't possibly stop the wind blowing by having an opposing wind blow against it. That makes no sense. That's what he's saying. This is the kind of stuff that's not making any sense. What else does man not have authority over? The day of his death. So the day of a man's death is just as certain as wind blowing. Man has no control over this in his life, no more than he has over the wind blowing. No matter what others tell you, you do not have authority over that day. God does. In verse 8, what else did Solomon say? And there is no discharge in the time of war. What does that mean? Man can't leave his military service during a war. Right? Do you get to check out on the day of battle and go, I think I changed my mind? It's called AWOL, right? Because we don't allow men to do that, right? What does that have to do with what he's been talking about? Well, and here's the other thing. One can't wait until they see the clear signs of danger and think they can escape then. Right? When you sign up, you sign up. And there's a lot of men and women who have signed up in their military service, and they've worked behind a desk or they've prepared for battle but never went in. And then there's others that went straight in. So what he's saying is, you don't get to hope that there's not going to be a battle. Get the pay, get the uniform, get everything that goes with it, and then when the ultimate thing is that comes before you that you were preparing to do comes, you don't get to go, I've weighed my options and I don't think this is a good one now. Right? You don't get to do that. How many people do you know who think at some point when they see a certain thing, then they're going to come to the Lord. Then they're going to know. Then it's going to be a time in their life when they're going to get their act together. Then. Solomon says that's not how it works. That's why he uses this picture. In the same way that this is true, how did Solomon end this verse? And evil will not deliver those who practice it. Think about those two things tied together now. Think about the man who signs up for military service and then wants to leave. That's not possible. There are men who practice evil and do not seem to endure the consequences even during their lifetime. There will be a point when evil will be judged. They won't be able to check out of the battle. They will have picked their side. They don't get to go AWOL. Thank goodness we can go to the New Testament here. We're going to go and see Paul's perspective on this in 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 5. Paul says, therefore, do not go on passing judgment before the time, but wait until the Lord comes, who will both bring to light the things hidden in the darkness and disclose the motives of men's hearts. And then each man's praise will come to him from God. Wouldn't it have been nice if Paul could have shared that nugget with Solomon? But we have it. Paul's there sharing that nugget with us for the same reason. So we don't spin out. And we know ultimately God will bring justice. You don't need to spin out here trying to figure it out. You can let it go because God is going to bring justice, period. He is the ultimate judge. Back to Ecclesiastes verse 9, what did Solomon say this reminded him of? He says, all I have seen and applied my mind to every deed that had been done under the sun, wherein a man has exercised authority over another man to his hurt. I don't know about you ladies, it's hard to keep these all in context, one to the other, like, whoa, where did we go? Oh, are we in the same room? So Solomon begins with what phrase? He says, all of this I have seen. What did we say that it means when Solomon says? He's a witness to the events. That's what we've discovered so far. So after witnessing these things, what did Solomon try to understand? He says, and I applied my mind to every deed that had been under the sun. What specific events? Wherein a man has exercised authority over another man to his hurt. You see how it's good to take each of those verses? How did they tie to the previous one? How do they tie to the next one? How do they link? So Solomon applies his mind specifically to situations in which there are those who are exercising authority over another man to his hurt. Verse 10. What was an outcome that Solomon witnessed? He said, so then, I have seen the wicked buried. Who are these wicked that he's describing? Those who used to go in and out of the holy place. What men go in and out of the holy place? A priest. These priests are described as wicked. They also used to go in and out from the holy place. So they did at one time, and now they do not. So again, this would be Solomon saying, I've seen this. In the past, I have seen this. They died, but what else was true for them? And they're soon forgotten in the city where they did this, or thus. These men will not be remembered, not even in the city where they committed their acts of wickedness. This is ultimately what? Futility. Okay, what event can we find where Solomon has experience with a priest who in the end demonstrated himself to be wicked? Wouldn't that be what we did, what we've done before when he says, I've seen or I've witnessed? We look at what he says and then we go, okay, where did this happen? Like last week, we tied it to the 1,000 wives. If you look in scriptures, it's pretty, oh, here it is, 1,000 wives. So he's talking about an evil priest going in and out of the holy place. We can agree on that. So what stories do we know about? Again, this would take some understanding of the history. So we would have been either in Samuel studying or Kings. Question? No, it's not. But that's a good one because I did some research there. I was going to go there. No, that's good. That's the way we need to think. For us to say in our minds, what do I remember that I've studied about bad priests? And they're way up there. If there's like in the dictionary, bad priest, they're pictures right there. Eli's sons, they represented it big time. So yes, they are evil, but they were pre-Solomon. So I'm looking for somebody that had connection in Solomon's day because he said I witnessed. So that's why I moved a little further in advance in history. So let's start with David asking Solomon to take out some wicked men. So we're going to build this. We're going to start with the generic of it, and then we're going to get to the specific of the priest. So in 1 Kings chapter 2, verses 5 and 6, we read, Now you also know that Joab, the son of Zeruiah, did to me what he did to the two commanders of the armies of Israel, to Abner, the son of Ner, and to Amasa, the son of Jether, whom he killed. He also shed the blood of war in peace, and he put the blood of war on his belt about his waist and on his sandals, on his feet. So act according to your wisdom, and do not let his gray hair go down to Sheol in peace. So, prior to David has asked Solomon to do this event. So before David dies, he has a conversation with Solomon, and he tells them, I want you to take him out. And here's why I want you to take him out. So Joab was a person that needed to be taken out. David didn't do it in his lifetime, but he obviously had no problem asking his son to make sure that this happened. All right, so that's what scriptures tell us. What other event do we know that Joab, the same evil, wicked man, is involved in where we can connect him to a priest? That will help us understand where Solomon's going. 1 Kings chapter 1, verses 5 through 7. Now, Adonijah, the son of Haggith, exalted himself, saying, I will be king. So he prepared for himself chariots and horsemen with 50 men to run before him. His father had never crossed him at any time by asking, Why have you done so? And he was also a very handsome man, and he was born after Absalom. He had conferred with Joab, the son of Zeruiah, and Abiathar, the priest. And following Adonijah, they helped him. So wicked Joab gets in cahoots with the priest that's named for us here, and the two of them help Adonijah to be king after David. Instead of who? Solomon. Does Solomon have some experience in this? Would he have witnessed some of this unfolding? Absolutely. When did Solomon eventually have to deal with these two men? So the request that came from David was also paired with these two men doing something that then Solomon himself records in Scripture that he had to take care of. 1 Kings chapter 2, verses 22 through 34. King Solomon answered and said to his mother, "And why are you asking Abishag the Shunammite for Adonijah?" All right, you really have to have gone back to do this story. So the short version is she was a concubine of David. This son had not been given the crown, Solomon had. So he thought he'd take a back door. He thought he'd make one of David's concubines be his wife, therefore marrying himself to David and potentially producing heirs. Either he or his sons, he wanted to have a claim to the throne. And it seemed innocent enough, and so he goes to Solomon's mom and says, "Could you put in a good word? Because I'd really like to have this woman for my wife." That's what's going on here. Does that sound weird? I mean, where do you go for more weird stories than the Bible? And so that's why he's asking, why are you asking for this? And he says, ask for him also the kingdom. Do you see why he's saying that to her? You might as well just give him the whole kingdom. This is not a small thing you're asking. You're asking something really big. You might as well give him the kingdom. For he is my older brother. Even for him, for Abiathar the priest and for Joab the son of Uriah. So apparently Solomon makes a very strong connection between this brother who tried to take the throne and Joab and this priest. Very strong connection. Then King Solomon swore by the Lord, saying, "May God do so to me, and more also, if Adonijah has not spoken this word against his own life." He says, now his words are going to come down on him. I know what he's really asking for. And he's going to suffer judgment for it. That's what he said. "Now, therefore, as the Lord lives, who has established me and set me on the throne of David, my father, and who has made me a house, and as he promised, surely Adonijah shall be put to death today." So King Solomon sent Benani, the son of Jehoiada, and he fell upon him, and so that he died. He fell upon him. That's kind of a nice way of saying whatever it was that happened here. All right? He didn't trip him, okay? So it wasn't an accident. He went after him, and he, whatever it was, took him down. That's what it means by fell upon him. He has taken out this man. Then to Abiathar the priest, the king said, "Go to Adanoth, to your own field, for you deserve to die. But I will not put you to death at this time, because you carried the ark of the Lord God before my father David, and because you were afflicted in everything with which my father was afflicted." So Solomon dismissed Abiathar from being priest to the Lord in order to fulfill the word of the Lord which he'd spoken concerning the house of Eli in Shiloh, which is why I did some study on the sons of Eli. But it's too much to go into because it really doesn't change. This is the priest he's talking about. Now the news came to Joab. What news came to Joab? Adonijah's been taken out, and the priest has been let go. He's been sent packing. So that news reaches Joab. For Joab had followed Adonijah, although he had not followed Absalom, meaning when there'd been a previous son that rose up against David, he hadn't joined in that one. So it's kind of like saying, well, he was evil on this one. At least he didn't join the other one too. All right? And Joab fled to the tent of the Lord and took hold of the horns of the altar. It was told King Solomon that Joab had fled to the tent of the Lord, and behold, he is beside the altar. Why? Why did he go there? He thought he was going to be safe in the tent, didn't he? That was going to be his escape. That was going to be his way out. That's what he thought he was going to be able to get by with. Then Solomon sent Benaiah the son of Jehoiada and said, go fall upon him. We know what that's what that's code for. So Benaiah came to the tent of the Lord and said to him, thus the king has said, come out. So he tries to get him to come out. He tries to get him to do the right thing. He says, your time's up. So you need to come out here. You need to take it like a man. Come out here, because I don't really want to go into the tent to do this. But he said, no, for I will die here. So he let Joab choose. So Benaiah brought the king word again, saying, thus spoke Joab, and thus he answered me. He's trying to be as respectful as he can before he has to do what he's called to do. And he wants to make sure, hey, you do realize, Solomon, that this is what's going on and where he is, and this is what he's told me. Are you sure this is what you want me to do? The king said to him, do as he has spoken and fall upon him and bury him, that you may remove from me and from my father's house the blood which Joab shed without cause. The Lord will return his blood on his own head, because he fell upon 2 men more righteous and better than he, and killed them with the sword, while my father David did not know it. Abner the son of Ner, commander of the army of Israel, and Amasa the son of Jether, commander of the army of Judah. So Joab did these evil things without others that were supposed to be in charge knowing what was going on. He did it behind their back. He was an evil man. So shall their blood return on the head of Joab and on the head of his descendants forever. But to David and his descendants and his house and his throne, may there be peace before the Lord forever. Then Benaiah the son of Jehoiada went up and fell upon him. And so we wouldn't be confused, and put him to death. And he was buried at his own house in the wilderness. Solomon was involved in this story of evil men and what had to happen to those evil men. So we learn here that David had asked Solomon to bring down the judgment of death upon Joab for his wickedness of killing 2 righteous men. But remember, he killed a lot more than those 2. Don't let that. He brought war when there shouldn't have been war. Many men died because of Joab's evil, wicked ways. But David is in particular wanting justice for these 2 righteous men. Don't you think there's a whole bunch of spinning out that went on? And why did these 2 righteous men die by the hands of an unrighteous man? Isn't that the whole theme? So it didn't just happen in Solomon's day that this theme was there and it was something that was questioned. It's been going on from the beginning of creation. And it's still going on today. Joab tried to hide in the tent of the Lord beside the altar. That was the holy place at that time, because remember, we don't have the temple built yet. That doesn't happen until Solomon does it in his lifetime. So Joab and Adonijah have also aligned with the priest Abiathar. But get this, he wasn't just any old priest. He's the high priest. And guess where we get confirmation of that? In the New Testament, in Mark chapter 2, verses 23 through 26. And it happened that he was passing through the grain fields on the Sabbath. That would be Jesus. And his disciples began to make their way along while picking the heads of grain. The Pharisees were saying to him, look, why are they doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath? Remember, that's the whole conflict with the self-righteous trying to condemn Christ and his disciples. And he said to them, have you never read what David did when he was in need and he and his companions became hungry? How he entered the house of God in the time of Abiathar the high priest, and ate the consecrated bread, which is not lawful for anyone to eat except the priest. And he also gave it to those who were with him. Wasn't just any old priest. He's the high priest of Israel. So Joab and Abiathar the priest had conspired with Adonijah to usher him in as king in Israel to replace David instead of Solomon. That was their evil. Why do you think he's been talking about taking an oath before kings? You think it has something to do with the story that he's getting ready to tell us about? 1 Kings chapter 1, verse 18 and 19. Now behold, Adonijah is king, and my lord the king, do you not know it? So this is a report coming to King David. He has sacrificed oxen and fatlings and sheep in abundance, and has invited all the sons of the king and Abiathar the priest and Joab the commander of the army, but he has not invited Solomon your servant. Think about that. These sacrifices that were offered by Adonijah would have been overseen and administered by a priest. Right? If it's going to have the legal stamp of approval, doesn't the high priest of Israel need to be there to bring in the new king? Abiathar may have been honoring to David in his early years, right? When he gave him bread and, if you read the whole battle between Saul and what went on. But in his later years, what did he prove to be? He was a traitor and he was wicked. Because if he wasn't, would he have actually known who the next king was supposed to be? Right, so he didn't have the counsel of God, did he? He was wicked. He abandoned him in his last years, and he tried to make Adonijah king without David's consent, and obviously without consulting God. That was what the high priest did in Israel. Back to Ecclesiastes. See, we're going to get back there. Chapter 8, verse 11. What observation was Solomon able to make? He says, because the sentence against an evil deed is not executed quickly, therefore the hearts of the sons of men among them are given fully to do evil. Okay, what story did we just look at? In the case of Joab, he committed his murders when the two murders that specifically David had asked Solomon to kill him over, he committed those back in the day when there was conflict after Saul had died, and some wanted to go after the family of Saul to be the king, and others were trying to decide with David. So there's conflict. Who are we going to honor? David ultimately had become king. How many years is it between when David asked Solomon to carry this deed out and when Joab murdered those two righteous men? How long was King David king? 40 years. 4 decades of time in which it would sure appear Joab got by with his evil. Right? From man's looking at him, he's commander of the army. He's still hanging out with the wealthy. He's still doing everything he wants to do. So from man's perspective, it sure didn't look like what you would expect justice to look like for the wicked, did it? And how much evil did Joab commit in that delay of time? Solomon says this delay of a sentence against an evil was not executed quickly. We can see that in this case. It was true for Joab. Is it true for others? Yeah, generically we know that to be true. But he's giving a specific example. This is why I say, look, he was talking about suddenly giving an oath to a king. Where does that come from? It's because that's the story that he's going to unfold for us that he has personal experience with. And we can confirm that when it looks like it took a long time for justice to happen for Joab. What happens to men where there is a delay in carrying out a sentence? They do more evil. Think about it. This man, Adonijah, was not anointed by God to become the king of Israel. And Solomon may have been privy to other evils, not only just that Joab committed, but that this high priest has committed over time. It's just not recorded in Scripture for us. Wouldn't that be interesting? It's not recorded in Scripture because he just said that man's not even known in the city that he committed the crime in. Not going to be recorded. We're not going to give any credence to who that man was. Other than Christ mentions he's the guy that was, in the temple when David came through. Only to verify it was the high priest. That's who we're talking about. Not just any old priest. The high priest of Israel was involved in this wickedness, this treachery. When men don't receive justice in the moment of their sin, they are inclined to commit more sin, thinking they are getting by with something. Just because we don't see all justice carried out here on earth, we do know that there will ultimately be justice. That's what Paul gives us in the New Testament. That's where we can let go of everything because we know he's the ultimate judge. This is what bothered Solomon so much that he could not tell where men stood before God by what was going on the earth. Right? He says, I've witnessed this grievous thing and I don't get it. Why did God allow that? Why didn't God just take Joab out on his own before I had to deal with it? Before I had to send a guy in after him in the temple, in the tent. Why, God? Why? Solomon is trying to understand why. And he's not getting an answer. In Ecclesiastes chapter 8, verses 12 and 13, although a sinner does evil 100 times and may lengthen his life, still I know that it will be well for those who fear God, who fear him openly. But it will not be well for the evil man, and he will not lengthen his days like a shadow, because he does not fear God. So what does Solomon start with? He says, although a sinner does evil 100 times, so what does it mean that a sinner does evil 100 times? Is it at 100 times then God acts? No. So what would you say it would mean when you hear sinner 100 times? Just continually. It's just a reflection that it's a continual sinner continuing to sin. His evil does not cause him to die. So in this way, Solomon says it may lengthen his life. Think about a sinner, even maybe Joab or other sinners, who lie about their sin to keep it from being discovered, or maybe conspires to have someone else convicted for their sin. Does it in that moment look like they got by with something? That they lengthened their life? Right? From man's perspective, that's what it would look like. What does Solomon then declare? I know that it will be well for those who fear God and fear him openly. That seems like a positive thing. Where did Sophie go when I had the positive thing? Maybe she'd be more confused. In the end, Solomon declares it will be well for those who fear God. Who are those who fear God? Believers. How are these men described? Who fear him openly. Those who would do what they took an oath to do before God would be those doing something publicly or openly. It's still in relationship to what he's been discussing. He's not left that thought process. In verse 13, what is the result of the man who will not do this? It will not be well for the evil man. So what exactly does Solomon say will not go well for this man? He will not lengthen his days like a shadow. This man will not lengthen his days. How is the lengthening of days described? It's like a shadow. What is a shadow? It's an impression of something that has absolutely no substance. Right? If you see a shadow of that chair, the shadow isn't the chair. Right? So it's no substance. It looks like something, but it's not real. That's what he's saying. It appears that he's lengthening it, but he actually hasn't. Right? Again, God confusion. God confusion. It's not making sense to men. This ultimately happens why? He does not fear God. What is one who does not fear God? He would be an unbeliever. Be careful, because can we conclude that one who is a believer can extend his life on earth? No. We've already established that Solomon would give us different counsel on that one. So Solomon just gives what one might say is obvious, to say that it is better to fear God than to not fear God. Fear God for others to see openly, those who hide their actions to do so because they do not fear God. They do not believe there are actually going to be a day of reckoning. This is making sense on a general level, but does it make more sense when you understand the story behind it that Solomon is referring to with the priest and with Joab? Right? It puts it in context for us so that it makes more sense. Ecclesiastes 8, verses 14 and 15. There is futility which is done on the earth. That is, there are righteous men to whom it happens according to the deeds of the wicked. On the other hand, there are evil men to whom it happens according to the deeds of the righteous. I say this too is futility. Does that sum up what we've been trying to say here? So I commend pleasure. For it is nothing good for a man under the sun except to eat and to drink and to be merry, and this will stand by him in his toils throughout the days of his life, which God has given him under the sun. Doesn't that sound happy? Verse 14, how does Solomon describe what he can't understand? There is futility which is done on the earth. That is, there are righteous men to whom it happens according to the deeds of the wicked. I had to rewrite these questions several times because it got very confusing. So if I get it wrong, make sure you fix me. What does Solomon describe first? He says, there is futility which is done. So this futility is seen by Solomon in men's lives. How is it described? That is, there are righteous men to whom happens according to the deeds of the wicked. How are the men described? Righteous men. What happens to these righteous men? It happens according to the deeds of the wicked. What happens to the righteous men look like what should happen to those who are committing deeds of wickedness. What else does he go on to describe? He says, on the other hand, if that one didn't confuse you enough, on the other hand, there are evil men to whom it happens according to the deeds of the righteous. And I say this too is futility. So the next group of men described are, there are evil men. What happens to the evil men? To whom it happens according to the deeds of righteous. What is it happens describing? The events that occurred, right? What happened is the events that happened. Very good. So the events that occur for the evil men are described how? According to the deeds of the righteous. So the events that happened for the evil men look as though the event should be happening for a righteous man. For the deeds of a righteous man and what he would have done. Total confusion. That's what Solomon has been about for multiple chapters now. When evil men are rewarded as though they were righteous and the righteous men receive as though he was evil, what is Solomon's conclusion? I had to say that this too is futility. Solomon says seeing this is futility, and he's also saying, I believe, trying to figure it out is futility. In verse 15, if these reversed appearances of reward are true, what does Solomon say? Just commend pleasure. So under what condition does Solomon say he commends pleasure seeking? For there is nothing good for a man under the sun, except to eat and to drink and to be merry. Does that sound like he's saying it in the positive way? Because there are many that go, oh, Solomon had this really positive thing that he said, that we should eat and drink and be merry. Well, with everything else he's saying, do you think that's what he's saying? He says man can't guarantee he will receive what he deserves in this life. That's what he just said. So where is this man described to be by Solomon in that verse? There is nothing good for a man under the sun. Man should do what? Eat, drink, and be merry. If there is nothing else to consider for man except that which can be measured from his earthly life, man should just live for what he can experience in this earthly life. Does that sound like a man who's got it figured out? He's frustrated when he says this. Well, if I can't guarantee by doing X, Y, Z, I get the good stuff, or if I see another guy doing the bad stuff and I know bad stuff, if I can't figure it out, if there's no checklist for me to figure out what I need to do, maybe I should just forget all that and just eat, drink, and be merry. Let's just do what I can do today. He doesn't talk about following God today. He doesn't talk about, giving over to God's will. He doesn't give any of that positive. This is not a positive comment. It's in frustration that he speaks these words. What will this perspective give that man who does this? This will stand by him through his toils, throughout the days of his life, which God has given him under the sun. Well, if he's got nothing else, at least he could just do that every day. Maybe that's where he needs to go for the extent of what he needs to understand and nothing more. From a man's perspective. I can't figure it out. I'm tired of trying to figure it out. I can't do it. And so I'm just going to give up and I'm just going to focus on what I do today. Eat, drink, and be merry. Not even going to try to figure it out anymore. Maybe that's why he talked about all that stuff that he did when he had all of the wealth and the money and he did all the seeking of the pleasure. Maybe that's where he had turned. The sum of what man accomplishes in this life will be what stands by him in this earthly life. Where is this perspective seen? In that verse, that which God has given him under the sun. For what God's just given you on earth, just make that be your focus. And we know under the sun to mean here on earth. And what is the under the sun a reference to? That which is going on during a man's earthly life. He's using terms of wickedness and righteousness, but he continues to talk about what men do here, not eternal. All right, he's still focused here. Verses 16 and 17. When I gave my heart to know wisdom and to see the task which had been done on the earth, even though one should never sleep day or night, and I saw every work of God, I concluded that man cannot discover the work which has been done under the sun. Even though man should seek laboriously, he will not discover. And though the wise man should say, I know, he cannot discover. Verse 16. What did Solomon say that he did? He gave his heart to know wisdom. What did Solomon's wisdom lead him to observe? And to see the task. What is a task? It's a work, right? If I say there's a task I have to do, there's something, a job, something I have to do. So work done where? Which has been done on earth. How important would that work be? Even though one should never sleep day or night. That's how important the task must be in Solomon's mind. I need the wisdom to figure out this task, a task so important. If you really knew what it was, you wouldn't sleep day and night. You'd just do the task over and over and over, right? If you figured it out, you'd know what you should do. Verse 17. Solomon compared this observation to what? And I saw every work of God. Do you think he saw every single work? No. What did this comparison cause Solomon to conclude? Man cannot discover the work which has been done under the sun. Work done where? Under the sun. That would mean here on earth. What is true in regards to man for this work done on earth? Man can't discover it. Man cannot discover work done on earth to match the work of God. They do not line up. Man's work does not line up with how God responds in terms of rewarding righteousness and wickedness. This is true beyond what? Even though a man would seek laboriously, he will not discover. And though a wise man should say, I know, he cannot discover.
Why can't this be positive? Why can't this be
because where men go in their own minds to come up with their own answers will ultimately leave them spinning, just like I believe it's left Solomon spinning.
But he's separating under the sun and what God did.
We haven't seen the conclusion to that. I will say that. We don't know where he might be going. But so far, in the examples that he continues to put out for us, right? I mean, last week we had the 1,000, and we talk about what that looked like, and what did he do with the 1,000, and he was seeking one answer upon the other as he was worshiping all these foreign. I mean, that's the thing I think is so important as we go through Ecclesiastes, is that we do tie it back to Solomon's life and what's recorded in the scriptures about his life and what he actually did to give it the weight that it deserves. Because it seems so simple to say, well, a righteous didn't get this and a wicked didn't get that. And, well, we can on a surface level agree with that. But this rocked Solomon's world. There was nothing on the earth that he couldn't explain. Go back and read about Solomon's life and the true wisdom that he had. I mean, the Queen of Sheba shows up and has, conference time with him. And she says, everything that I was told about you didn't even scratch the surface. He knew about every animal, every plant, every building technique. The man was brilliant. But here's something that he couldn't put his finger on. Why can't I see what God is going to do? Why? That's what he doesn't understand in his wisdom. And he said, you know what? I'm starting to realize for the one that says that he can, he's wrong. Because no man can know that. It is a good thing. I'm saying it's a good thing when we understand what the definition of sovereignty is, right? Because we talked about that in chapter 3. You can talk to a whole lot of people that say, oh, I believe that God is sovereign. Yep, he's sovereign. Well, there's a line in the sand for him. Well, he's sovereign. Well, up to this. Then God's not sovereign. Then it's man's choice. No. God is 100% in everything that he does all the time, sovereign, from the beginning to the end. So we know that because Solomon is realizing that by saying, I can't explain to you why bad things happen to good people and why good things happen to the wicked people. There's no checklist, nothing makes sense to me. You would think, I'm so smart that I would have been able to figure this out. I would have come up with the checklist. And instead, he reveals these amazing things that happened in his own life of wickedness and righteousness. Because think about it. How ultimately wicked did we find Solomon to be when we looked at his history of idol worship? What the scriptures revealed that he opened the door in Israel to. It was pretty awful. Maybe he's the wicked that doesn't understand why he's still going. Wickedness not dealt with immediately. 1,000 wives later. And who knows whatever else that he's been involved in.